Welcome, viewers, to the Rambling Historian, and welcome to part 2 of American City History. In this episode, we will be talking about Mobile, Alabama. Mobile is located on the Alabama coast near the mouth of the Mobile and Tennessee rivers. Mobile has the only saltwater port in the state. Mobile was named after the Mobile tribe. The Mobile sold French colonists land in the Mobile Bay in 1702. Settlers built Fort Louis de Louisiane along a bluff next to the Mobile River and named the settlement as the capital of French Louisiana. The city was set up to make France's claim over Louisiana more legitimate. A ship called Pelican transported passengers to the colony. Many of those passengers had yellow fever and had started an outbreak in Mobile against settlers and Native Americans upstream. This would be the first of main disease outbreaks in colonial Mobile, which slowed the growth of the settlement. The Roman Catholic parish in the colony was the first ever built on the Gulf Coast. The colony unfortunately had slaves that were transported from the French colony of Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti. Floods in the city led to it being relocated downriver closer to the ocean in 1711. The population slowly grew, but struggled to reach over even 500 people. In 1720, the capital of French Louisiana was moved away from Mobile to Biloxi, but the colony remained a center for trade and the military. A new fort was constructed in the new settlement in 1723 and named Fort Conde. Mobile grew and was untouched by the 7 Years' War in the 1750s and 60s. After the 7 Years' War, all French territories east of the Mississippi were given to Britain. This included Mobile, and the colony became part of British West Florida. The fort in the settlement was renamed Fort Charlotte. Many of the French colonists left the city, but about 100 remained after being promised religious freedom by the British. This pledge of religious freedom did not only cover Catholicism, and several Jewish settlers came to Mobile to become traders. In 1766, the city had reached a population of 860. During the Revolution, Mobile and the surrounding areas became a refuge for people loyal to the British, and Mobile never took part in the Revolution. During the Revolutionary War, the Spanish, who gained control of French Louisiana after the 7 Years' War, became an ally of the Americans and joined the war in 1779. In 1780, the Spanish gained control of Mobile after winning the Battle of Fort Charlotte. Fort Charlotte was renamed Fort Carlotta, and the area remained under Spanish control until the area was taken by U.S. General James Wilkinson during the War of 1812. The population of Mobile had fallen back to 300. The city became part of Alabama Territory in 1817. Mobile's population grew to 800 when Alabama became a state in 1719, but still had not regained its highest population. Mobile was well located for trade, and the growth of steamboats along its two rivers in the Gulf Coast brought the population to a new high of 2,800 by 1822. The Industrial Revolution left much of Europe at a need for cotton. The area around Mobile's two rivers was well suited for cotton growth, and that cotton would be shipped to Europe from Mobile. Upriver had a plantation economy sadly fueled by slave labor. Thousands came to Mobile in hopes of getting rich off of the cotton trade. The city also became one of the unfortunate centers of the slave trade, and became the biggest in Alabama until it was surpassed by Montgomery. Merchants, mainly from the north, came to the city in 1850. 10% of the population was from New York alone. The city boomed in the 1830s and grew despite slowdowns from the Panic of 1837 and yellow fever outbreaks. Large warehouses and other facilities were built along the waterfront, and the city became the second biggest for cotton exports, only behind New Orleans. By 1860, Mobile's population had reached almost 30,000, with about 1,000 being free people of color. Since Mobile was part of Alabama, it was in the Confederacy. Mobile became a military port, and the first Confederate submarine to sink a Union ship, the H.L. Hunley, was built in Mobile. The Battle of Mobile Bay was one of the most famous naval battles in the Civil War, and it resulted in the Union gaining control of Mobile Bay. The city surrendered to the Union in 1865, 3 days after Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox, to avoid destruction of nearby areas. Shortly after the surrender, an ammunition depot exploded in the city and destroyed much of the surrounding areas, sank ships in the harbor, and started huge fires. Despite that, the city recovered. Mobile took part in the Reconstruction until 1874 when Southern Democrats gained control of the city's local government. The end of the Reconstruction meant that Jim Crow laws and other racist legislation could and would be passed in southern states. Mobile's economy was almost entirely based on slavery-related trades and thus had a major economic depression in the later part of the 1800s. The value of exports drastically decreased by the millions in 1800s money. A progressive era began in Mobile around the turn of the century. New industries meant more jobs and the population grew to 40,000 in 1900. Millions in federal grants were used to improve harbor infrastructure and larger ships could now enter the port. Manufacturing grew during World War I and became one of the city's core industries. Shipment and production of steel as well as shipbuilding grew in the city. Racism worsened in the state at this time. Several laws disenfranchised most African Americans and many poor whites. The city of Mobile passed many segregation ordinances to segregate things like public transport, and Jim Crow laws worsened throughout the region. New high-rises and other buildings began to go up in the city. Apparently, the first fire ants were brought to America through the port of Mobile in the 1930s. Once World War II started, Mobile became a center for the production of the U.S. Navy, especially Liberty ships, which were easy to build cargo ships transporting supplies to Europe. Several destroyers and other ships were built in Mobile, and the famous battleship USS Alabama is still located in the port of the city today as a museum. A race ride occurred in 1943 when ADSCO, a company which built many of the Navy ships in Mobile, opened a few loading jobs for African Americans. Many of the white workers rioted, and the mayor had to have the National Guard sent in to stop the violence. It would be weeks before the African Americans hired could get to work. When the war ended, thousands of jobs were lost in the city. Military facilities were used for civilian purposes, and the chemical and paper industry grew. Many African Americans, especially veterans, began to protest segregation in Mobile. In the 1850s, the city desegregated the police force. Some schools desegregated, and most lunch counters and businesses voluntarily ended segregation. In 1963, after Brown v. Board of Education, which desegregated public schools, 3 African American students were denied access to a Mobile public school and thus brought a suit against the town. The students were allowed to go to school, and all the public schools in the county were desegregated. Racism would decrease with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1968. In the 1980s, new facilities and projects were built. Neighborhoods were improved, and 2 tall buildings were built in the city center. Nowadays, the city is well known for its port, the USS Alabama, and military history, and the city center with all of its attractions. I hope you enjoyed this video.